Hey there, Henderson Hall Marines. My name's Brittany and I have been asked to talk to you today about safety and personal protective apparel. Normally, I'd be on stage in front of you live during the 101 Days of Summer, but thanks to COVID-19, I am doing this via video so that you can watch from the comfort of your own desk chair. I hope that you are willing to spend a couple of minutes with me as I share some of my unique experiences with you. Today I want to talk to you about perspective and attitude. My goal over the next few minutes is to give you a new and different perspective so that you might leave here with an upgraded attitude towards safety. So you might be thinking to yourself, what can she possibly have to tell me about perspective? Well, it all started with a motorcycle crash. Once upon a time, in a faraway land called New Mexico, half of my skin was ripped off in a motorcycle accident while riding on the back of a sport bike with a complete stranger. I was 20 years old, and the only piece of gear I was wearing was an old, borrowed, full-face helmet. This helmet, happened to save my life. You see, it starts out as a story that most people have heard before. Young girl meets boy at a party, they click, boy takes girl on a motorcycle ride, they have a great time, and everything ends well. My story doesn't end that way. The fact that I'm here to tell you my story is a rarity in itself. Most people who experience an incident like mine, well, they don't get to tell their story. So I'm here to speak for all of us and give you a perspective you hopefully will never have to experience yourself. I hit the ground at 120 miles an hour and tumbled 522 feet down the road in a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt. I tore my left pinky almost completely off, dislocated my right big toe from my foot, lost half of my right deltoid and tore my right rotator cuff. I shaved off half of my left breast and nipple. I compressed my L4 and L5 in my lower back together, causing a compression fracture and a herniated disc. I shaved down the bone in my left elbow and ripped off both of my kneecaps. I laid on the road with third-degree road burns on 50% of my body for 45 minutes, waiting for emergency crews. While bleeding out, I imagined what people would be saying about me at my funeral. I had an internal conversation with the powers that be, and I accepted my fate. I really just wanted to die on that road. I spent 2 months in the hospital and had 9 surgeries. I developed a life-threatening blood clot and 11 types of infection as a direct result of my injuries. My parents, they had to visit me in the hospital every day for over 60 days in a row. Their lives were literally put on hold. I became dependent on my pain medication. There were at least 14 in my system throughout my stay at the hospital. And I had violent mood swings with my doctors and my family as a result. A complete stranger had to help me shower in a chair made out of PVC pipe. And after all the surgeries, I had to learn to brush my teeth, sit up in bed, speak my name, and walk again. I spent Halloween dressed as the mummy. I spent my mom's birthday in early November in a wheelchair, and I spent Thanksgiving with a walker. There were more consequences that would take me longer to realize. Because of my injuries, I lost my desired career path in the Marine Corps, combat camera. I lost the ability to play my favorite sport. I lost my youthful athletic body. I lost all of my hair and half of my left breast. I lost my self-confidence. I lost my ability to carry children. I lost my clear and focused mind in exchange for PTSD and anxiety. For a long time, it felt like I lost everything. Today, people ask me how long it took for me to have a full recovery. Well, sadly, I fear that the real answer is forever, because there's no such thing as a full recovery when you have permanent debilitating injuries. It's been almost 15 years. I'm still suffering from the injuries and ongoing side effects. of being skinned alive. Every single day, my life is affected by the outcome of that ride. So now that I've triggered every memory of every injury you've ever had, I'm sure you can imagine that life after an incident like this is a struggle. But I'd like to tell you what I've done since I got out of the hospital. Really, it is only fair, since I'm sure you're sitting there thinking, the poster child for bad decisions is going to lecture me on safety. Who the heck does this chick think she is? I have much more perspective to share with you than just the passenger crash. No, I don't know it all, but I am a passionate motorcyclist with significant and well-rounded experiences and a very rare and unique perspective. I've been a motorcycle rider for the last 14 years. In fact, I bought my first motorcycle just 9 months after the day of the crash. I've been a presenter and a safety advocate for the last 14 years. My first presentation was for the Army at Fort Knox in 2007. I received 3 safety grants and created Rock the Gear, a non-profit motorcycle safety apparel education campaign, in 2008. I've been both a rider coach and a motorcycle safety instructor for the last 11 years in 3 programs in 3 states, teaching 7 different courses. I have been a long-distance motorcycle traveler and journalist for the past 8 years. My first overnight trip turned into a 4,000-mile ride across 12 states in 11 days. That was back in 2011. I've been an endurance and a rally racer for the last 5 years, dabbling in each. I've been a motorcycle and safety apparel reviewer for major motorcycle publications for the last 3 years, and I've been road racing since 2018. Speaking of road racing, it's time to switch gears. As much fun as we're having talking about a crash that nearly cost me my life, let's skip ahead to my next story. Another crash. I crashed my own motorcycle at 40 miles an hour during morning practice before my scheduled races. My parents were coming to watch me ride for the very first time, and I really wanted to do well in front of them. So I was pushing myself to the edge of my limits. And I remember saying, wow, I'm really close to the ground. And then boom, I was down just like that. After a short slide and a couple of tumbles, I got up and walked to the edge of the track without any assistance. Once the track was clear, I helped the corner worker pick up my bike, and I smiled when it started right up. I would have ridden my bike off the track if that wasn't against the rules. But instead I jumped in the crash truck with my R6 and went back to my pits, where my boyfriend and my parents were waiting for me and so worried. But I immediately was able to hug them, told them I was just fine. I drank some water, and then I helped everyone fix my bike so that it was ready for my next race. I rode an hour later, and I raced twice more that day, while the people that I love the most in this world watched me and cheered me on from the stands. A day later, I was packing a suitcase and boarding an airplane for a motorcycle review job in California. 2 days after the crash, I test rode a brand new bike for nearly 7 hours in the Malibu hills of Southern California. After just a few days, the small bruises faded, and it was like it never even happened. I never once questioned my ability to return to normal life after my crash at the racetrack. So now that you've heard both of my stories, we're going to analyze and compare them side by side using the following 5 criteria: motivation, circumstances, ability, protective apparel, and outcome. So let's recap the outcome of the first crash. Immediately, I had 50% of my body covered in road burns, bone damage, a spinal injury, muscle injury, and tendon injuries all over my body. In the short term, I had 9 surgeries, 11 infections, addiction to my medication, hair loss, and loss of mobility. And in the long term, I had memory loss. I lost my career, PTSD, the inability to carry children, lifelong pain, and grief. So let's talk about why it happened. Well, my motivation that day was to impress a boy and have a good time. The rider was thinking the same thing. The amount of training that I had on a scale of 1 to 10, 2. I had been a passenger before, so I was doing what I had been told by the current rider and all the previous people who had given me rides. I was emulating what I saw others doing both in person and on TV and in the movies. But I had no formal or professional training whatsoever, and that's pretty standard for most young passengers. Well, the circumstances that contributed to the crash: I got on a bike with someone I didn't know to go for a ride with people who didn't know me, and I wasn't holding on just as I had been told. We were on the highway at high speeds, outside of town, on an otherwise perfectly sunny September day. I want you to make note that the road conditions and other outside factors played no part in the outcome of my crash. So now we know why it happened. Let's talk about why the outcome was so extreme. I hit the ground at a high rate of speed without any protective apparel. A borrowed helmet 3 sizes too big, and it saved my life, but just barely. What else was I wearing? A sweatshirt, jeans, sneakers. I might as well have been wearing onesie pajamas. And we can all agree that hopes and dreams are not a form of training, and they are certainly not a form of protection. So what were the circumstances that dictated the outcome? How and why did I survive? Well, there was no traffic following or oncoming traffic to run me over. I rolled down the asphalt, but there were no other obstacles like curbs or poles. And my physical fitness level at the time, which is speculation, as I was training for the Marine Corps. In other words, I got really lucky. That's how I survived. But why did I survive? I like to think that I survived so that I could share my perspective with others on behalf of others. What did I gain from all of this? A purpose. But that's not the whole story, is it? I have more perspective to share. So let's recap the outcome of the second crash. Immediately, I had a banged up bike. I had some scuffs on my leather suit. I had an elevated heart rate. My family members were worried about me for about 5 minutes. I was worried about my worried family members for about 5 minutes. But immediate consequences were also that I was able to hug my family, tell them that I was just fine. And I was able to think about what caused the crash, figure out how to fix it. Super short-term consequences was that I had to frantically help fix my bike with my friends for about an hour so that I could ride again. I got to ride again an hour later, and I promised my parents to take it easy. I lost my first race by a lot, but I beat my all-time best lap time in my second race that day. I still didn't win, but I wasn't afraid to get back on, and I had no injuries. A few days later, I had some bruises on my right elbow, and my right hip was a little tender, but I immediately went back to work, and I never second-guessed riding or racing again. In the long term, I had absolutely zero long-term effects, except maybe learning how to take that corner better next time. And we can't forget that I gained a new perspective on crashing. Yes, it was completely different than my last experience, but it was still a crash. So let's find out why. Why did it happen? Well, let's look at my motivation. I wanted to go fast. Pushing it usually means riding to the edge and sometimes over it. My abilities are rated much higher on this crash. I rated myself a 9.5 out of 10 because I have significant knowledge and coaching when it comes to racing. But applying it on the racetrack is still a work in progress, so I gave myself a 7 out of 10 in skill level. I know enough to know that there's always more to learn. The contributing factors list on this crash is so much more technically oriented than the first crash's contributing factors. And I want you to note that even with significant training and knowledge and a decent amount of skill, the crash still happened. And all 6 of those contributing factors listed are all my fault as a rider. The crash still happened because I was pushing it. And yet the outcome was completely different. Why? Well, a few very specific reasons. Let's take a look. Of course, I was wearing head-to-toe motorcycle-specific apparel, and in fact, it was full race-level apparel. Well, what does that mean? I had an ECER 2205 certified full-face helmet, a one-piece custom cowhide racing leather suit, the CE Level 1 D30 impact protectors in the shoulders, elbows, back, hips, and knees, armored road racing boots, cowhide and kangaroo gauntlet-length gloves with floating knuckle armor. Now, this list that I just gave you, yes, that applies to motorcycle road racing, but PPE applies to any sport, really anything that you do off-duty that involves risk. And that means both you and your family members. So let's put it into perspective for the visual learners. Burns versus bruises, a leather suit or leathery skin for a lifetime, months of physical therapy or immediately back to work, learning to walk versus learning to go faster, hanging with friends in a hospital bed versus hanging with teammates at a 24-hour endurance race. Both of these photos are exactly 1 month after each crash. And spending time with family. These photos, they speak for themselves. So, I got a couple of questions that I want you to ask yourself. Which of the two crash outcomes would you choose? Which outcome would your family choose? Easy enough to answer, right? How about a couple of medium difficulty questions? Ask yourself, why do you ride? Or why do you do the activities that you do? And what are you risking in order to do those activities? Now I have a couple of hard questions. I want you to ask yourself, what makes riding or the activity that you like to do worth the amount of risk that you have to take in order to do it? And the second question is, do you believe that anything like this can ever happen to you or someone from your family? Not so easy to answer those questions, is it? Why have I asked you these questions? Well, it's because we often mistake motivation and attitude. Motivation is defined as a reason or reasons for acting a certain way. To find your motivation, you ask yourself what makes it worth the risk. The answer is your reason for doing it, how it makes you feel. Now, attitude is defined as a settled way of thinking or feeling about something. To find out what your attitude is, you ask yourself, do you think that anything like this can or ever will happen to you? Your answer is what you truly believe and what you choose to do about it. The real difference that attitude makes. Spending time with your family. Going back to work. Doing the things that you love to do tomorrow. Without second guessing it. Without question. Without anything hindering you. So why do I still tell a 14-year-old story? Because I think it matters to every rider on the face of the planet. I will never forgive myself for what I put my family through in 2005. I will never forget how wonderful it felt to hug my parents and tell them I was okay after my second crash in full gear at the racetrack. Those two outcomes speak for themselves. I often hear, when your time is up, your time is up. But remember that there is a lot of gray area between death and 0 injuries. You might think it will never happen to you, but there's a huge group of riders who have crashed and will admit that even the smallest injury isn't worth the hassle, the pain, and the grief. Because I carefully considered time, place, and apparel in my second crash, I was protected from many types of injuries, from the catastrophic kind to the minuscule inconveniences and everything in between. I wasn't just uninjured, I was able to continue riding, spend quality time with the people I love, and return to work immediately after the crash because of the gear that I was wearing and the circumstances that I chose and had control over before pushing my limits. The venue was appropriate, my skill level was appropriate, and my apparel was appropriate. Each piece of gear I was wearing played a part, and together it made a difference in every aspect, from the immediate repercussions to the long-term effects. That is the true impact of choosing all the gear all the time. That's the true impact of gaining perspective and upgrading your attitude. All the science and data and storytelling and photos that are shared with you during the 101 days of summer, all the stats that you see and hear every day, that's all perspective. My perspective has shaped my attitude towards riding and motorcycle safety. Upgrading your attitude starts with taking in as much perspective as you can, because perspective is basically free experience. And perspective, as we've learned, is what shapes your attitude. Your new attitude will dictate your willingness to reduce risk. The first step is to truly believe that you are susceptible to crashing and accept the potential consequences of an incident. Attitude is personal and unique to each individual because it comes from within. So your attitude affects everything you do, from the choices you make before you get on your motorcycle or do the activity that you have chosen, to the choices you make while you're riding. And those choices absolutely contribute to the circumstances in which you will find yourself. New experiences will create a new perspective and will continue to upgrade your attitude. It's a beautiful cycle. The right attitude can dramatically change your life, the lives of those you love, and the lives of those who depend on you. When it comes to upgrading your attitude and finding your motivation, just remember both of my stories and imagine yourself in my place. You have the power to make a difference in your life and the lives of your loved ones. You have the information, so now I only have one more question to ask you. What are you going to do about it? The choice is yours. Choose wisely.